published, 5:35 EDT, the 24th of May 2018, updated, 7:26 EDT, the 24th of May 2018. A chilling image shows gaunt-looking nanny Sophie Lionnet just days before she was murdered by a French couple, as the victim's mother branded her killers monsters who had starved, tortured and broken her daughter. French au pair Ms. Lionnet was waterboarded and beaten to death at the Wimbledon home of Sabrina Couder and her partner Wisma Downey after being put through brutal interrogations by the paranoid bear. The couple were convicted of murder today after an often disturbing trial at the Old Bailey heard how the killers became convinced their nanny was spying on them. Speaking after the verdicts, Sophie's mother Catherine Devillon said, "These monsters repeatedly beat Sophie. They starved her, tortured her and broke her until she could no longer fight. We have now been tortured ourselves, forced to listen to Sophie's last moments, her sobs and her crying." Addressing Couder directly, the furious mother said, "Sabrina, no amount of shaving will ever cleanse your soul. No one, no God will ever forgive you both for what you have done to our daughter. You will not be forgiven for the lies." A shocking image shows nanny Sophie Lionnet after she was starved and tortured by the couple she worked for. She was murdered 2 days after this picture was taken. Sabrina Couder, 35, and Wisma Downey, 40, built a warped fantasy around music mogul Mark Walton and accused Sophie Lionnet of being in league with him. The couple tried to dispose of Sophie's body by burning it on a bonfire. A picture taken during the murder investigation shows the charred remains of the au pair's glasses. The couple barbecued chicken in a bid to cover the smell as they burned Sophie's body. The judge assured the victim's parents that there was no truth in the allegations the couple had made against their daughter and she was in no way to blame. Sophie's mother, Ms. Devillon, said today, "My heart is broken, shattered into a million pieces. Sophie's loss will not be meaningless, lessons will be learned." The shocking trial has heard how Couder was obsessed with her former lover, Boyzone founding member Mark Walton, and convinced herself the nanny had been hired by him to spy on her. Miss Lionnet was completely innocent and had never met Mr. Walton, but that did not stop Couder making increasingly outlandish claims against the quiet 21-year-old, which turned into violent beatings. The au pair did not have the money for the flight home to France and so became trapped in the couple's terrifying cycle of recriminations and violence before she died during a beating last September. Having killed her in the bath, the pair threw her on a bonfire in the garden of their home near Wimbledon, southwest London, as they barbecued chicken nearby. Couder and Downey blamed each other for the murder in a cutthroat defense but were convicted by an Old Bailey jury after a week of deliberations. Couder, who had ranted at her former lover throughout the trial, cried and shook her head in the dock before the verdicts were returned. The victim's mother Catherine Devillon wept as she entered the Old Bailey today following a long and often disturbing murder trial. Sophie Lionnet was a shy au pair who became trapped in her killer's violent, paranoid world. The self-proclaimed fashion designer was found guilty unanimously and burst into hysterics, saying no and shaking her head. Downey was convicted on a majority of 10-2. He wept quietly and stared at the floor as the verdicts were read out. Sophie's mother Catherine Devillon had cried quietly to herself as she waited for the jury to come back. Following the conclusion of the trial, Judge Nicholas Hilliard QC told Sophie's parents, "I am absolutely sure that there was no truth whatsoever in the allegations that were made against your daughter." Couder carried on shrieking and shaking her head as the judge consoled the family. Sophie's suitcase, emblazoned with French and British flags, was found stuffed in a shed. A picture of the patio where the couple tried to dispose of their nanny's body. Miss Lionnet came to work for the couple after a friend of Couder's brother Jamal suggested she try out as their nanny. In January 2016, a few days after her 20th birthday, she moved in permanently with the couple in London. It was the first and only job she ever had and, even though she was paid just £50 a week, she was constantly criticised by Couder for being lazy. Couder was fixated with her ex-boyfriend Mr. Walton and created a fantasy world casting Mr. Walton as an evil villain who seduced Miss Lionnet with promises of Hollywood stardom. Banker Madowny became an ardent believer in Couida's twisted reality, and they interrogated Miss Lionnet for hours to get to the truth. The paranoia which led to Miss Lionet's murder sprang from Couida's obsession with her ex-boyfriend Mark Walton, who gave evidence at the trial. Sabrina Couida and partner Wes Madowny have been convicted of killing their nanny. Jurors heard more than 8 hours of recordings in which Miss Lionnet was slapped, likened to a Nazi collaborator, and called worse than a murderer by her tormentors. For over a month, Miss Lionnet was interrogated, beaten and threatened by the couple as she desperately tried to appease them with false confessions and apologies. Sophie's mother Catherine Devillon begged Couida over the phone to send her daughter home, but Couida said she would not do so until she learned the truth about Sophie and Mark Walton. In the 48 hours before she died, Sophie suffered fractures to her breastbone and 5 of her ribs that were inflicted with severe force. Her jaw was also smashed in one of the final attacks. Although the precise cause of her death may never be known, pathologists believe she may have been drowned or suffered a blow to the head. The job as the couple's nanny was Sophie's first job, and she didn't have the money to get home for 2 days after she died. The couple kept the body in a suitcase in their shed, uncertain what to do. But the couple's attempts to cremate her body on the garden bonfire using nail polish remover as an accelerant meant that her corpse was too severely burnt for a precise cause to be established. They were also about to set fire to a carrier bag full of Sophie's written apologies, confessions and pleas for help when the fire brigade arrived. A takeaway owner has described getting goosebumps all over when he witnessed Sabrina Couida launch into a foul-mouthed tirade at her nanny. Michael Kroner befriended Sophie Lionnet and regularly gave her food and a fizzy drink when she visited his fish and chip shop. Couida and Wes Madowny wanted to rent space from him for a French pancake stall, but he was put off after finding out what the fashion designer was like. In an interview with ITV News, he said Miss Lionnet cried when she told him that she had been beaten. Desperate Sophie Lionnet confided in a local chip shop owner about her ordeal. Mr. Kroner said, "I started to talk to her as that was the time she wasn't with anyone, by herself. A couple of times she looked very sad. There were tears in her eyes, so then I started to talk to her, but it was still very hard to get anything out from her. One incident, she really started to cry here, she had tears falling down. Then I asked her what's going on. That was the time she said somebody had beat her, so then I knew something was there. Mr. Kroner said it was a big shock to hear she had been hit, and he knew she wanted to leave but he felt he could not interfere. Couida shouted at Miss Lionnet in French over the suggestion that Mr. Kroner wanted to help her get another job. He told the broadcaster, she yelled at her and yelled at her. Then she stopped, looked at me and said she's a FB, she wants sympathy from everyone. She's got a man here, a man there. That is where I really saw the real Sabrina. Mr. Kroner was asked if he had ever thought in his wildest dreams what the couple were capable of. He replied, no. Being with them doing things, I couldn't believe it until the last meeting when she came and had a go at me. That was when I knew who this Sabrina was. It was shocking. I was working behind the counter and I had goosebumps all over. Femme fatale killer described by her ex as a fickle lunatic turned to murder after a turbulent relationship with Boy's Own founding member who she met in a bank. Beautiful but deadly, Sabrina Couida was the ultimate femme fatale. The petite French woman was the star of her own fantasy film noir, and she cast Sophie Lionnet as the enemy. The glamorous mother of 2 was born in Algeria but grew up with her mother in Paris, where she met her first love in the unlikely form of Wes Madowny. At the age of 18, she had a summer job on a sweet stall at a fun fair where she caught the eye of fellow French Algerian Madowny, who was 5 years her senior. His ardent pursuit paid off, setting them up for a 17-year on-off relationship which ended acrimoniously in the dock of the Old Bailey. The trial has heard how Couida came up with increasingly wild theories about Miss Lionnet. In common with her other liaisons with men, it was dysfunctional, turbulent and unconventional, and marred by Couida's bouts of irrational jealousy and violence. Prosecutor Richard Horwell QC tried to unravel their strange bond, suggesting it was a marriage of convenience which suited Couida only until someone better came along. Madonna was said to be weak and easily led, a perfect foil for Couida's domineering personality. The couple met at a fun fair when Couida was 18. French-Algerian Madonna pursued her and they had a 17-year on-off relationship. They both appeared keen to keep their relationship ambiguous, with Couida regularly relegating Madonna to a relative or friend in public, rather than her life partner with an Islamic marriage certificate to prove it. At first, Madonna provided some stability and security amid Couida's emotional turmoil, which, it was claimed, led to more than one failed suicide attempt. When Couida went to London to work as a nanny, Madonna followed. She had turned her hand to pyramid selling for a telecommunications company when Mark Walton, of Boy's Own fame, came into the picture. In 2011, they had a chance meeting in a bank in Notting Hill and he fell head over heels in love. Once the love goggles wore off, Mr. Walton discovered a calculating and manipulative woman who could flip and go crazy in a moment. Couida claimed to know many celebrities and influential people from the party scene, and had been introduced to blue pop star Duncan James through Mr. Walton. When she split from the music mogul, she went back to Madonna, who would come and go from their Wimbledon flat at will. She helped with his French pancake stall and, at the time of her arrest, was helping to get a fashion business off the ground with a show in central London hosted by a major charity. Around the time of the murder, Couida was telling friends on WhatsApp that Sophie had returned to France despite her grand plans. Couida kept afloat by claiming benefits and accepting significant financial support from Mr. Walton long after they split up. When the handouts dried up, she racked up £20,000 in unpaid rent on her two-bedroom garden flat in the upmarket area in southwest London. At the heart of her problems lay depression and a borderline personality disorder, creating a distorted view of the world. Her trial heard, Couida was the driving force behind the interrogations in which killer her nanny and other ex-boyfriend, Anthony Francois, described her as fickle and a lunatic who would lie, manipulate and target the weak. He said she could lash out at complete strangers, grabbing women's hair just for looking at her. Her character flaws fueled an irrational obsession with Mr. Walton entirely based on an alternative truth created in her mind. She was so convinced that her ex-boyfriend was colluding with her nanny that she swept Madonna up into the fantasy too. Frustrated and thwarted in her attempts to get to LA-based Mr. Walton, she latched on to her naive young nanny as a soft target. She was the driving force of the violent interrogations of Miss Lionnet, but claimed Madonna was responsible for her death in September last year. I don't want a charred body to be my last memory of Sophie, heartbroken father of murdered French nanny says. He's haunted by her death, and releases her touching childhood photos. Speaking from his home in France earlier this month, Mr. Lionnet said, "When I was in London for the trial, I barely slept, maybe 1 or 2 hours a night. I have these terrible images in my head." By Nick Fagg in Troyes for Mail Online. The father of French nanny Sophie Lionnet says he is haunted by the death of his irreplaceable daughter as her killers were today found guilty of her murder. Fighting back his tears, Patrick Lionnet said, "I try to think of Sophie the last time I saw her, happy and smiling, but sometimes I cannot block out the horror. Looking through precious childhood photos of Sophie growing up," he said, "the picture of Sophie smiling in my house with the dog, telling me that she loves me and that she will miss me, has been replaced with the sound of my baby's voice full of fear and thick with tears. I have seen photos of her starved body, like something out of Auschwitz, that hardly resembled my precious child. I don't want the image of a charred body, a recognizable human nose and fingers to be my last memory of her." The guilty verdict brings no comfort to Mr. Lionnet, 56, who says he struggles to block out the sound of Sophie pleading for her life, which was played to the court. When he closes his eyes, he tries not to think of her charred remains of her body burned in the back garden of the family home in London where she worked as an au pair. French nanny Sophie Lionnet, pictured as a little girl while growing up in Troyes, south of Paris, was murdered in a home in Wimbledon, South London by Sabrina Couida, the mother of the little boy she was looking after, and the woman's boyfriend. The shy 21-year-old did not have the money to return home to France. The trial has heard speaking exclusively to Mail online. Mr. Lionnet, a gardener for the local authority, from Troyes, south of Paris, tells how he went through hell during the Old Bailey murder trial. I try not to think about what they did to Sophie, but I have been through hell. When I was in London for the trial, I barely slept, maybe 1 or 2 hours a night. I have these terrible images in my head. When I heard the audio of Sophie being tortured, I cracked. I just couldn't take it. I cannot forget the images of Sophie's body that were shown in court. They are not human, they are savages. They don't deserve to ever get out of jail for what they did to Sophie. I don't ever want to see them walking free on the streets. They deserve the severest punishment possible. Sitting in the garden of his modest home in France, Mr. Lionnet proudly wears the I Love Dad t-shirt that Sophie gave him as a Father's Day present a couple of years ago. Sophie's devastated father, Patrick Lionnet, 56, a gardener, pictured with his daughter as a youngster, told Mail Online from his home in France that he is haunted by her death and that he doesn't want her charred body to be his lasting image of her around his neck. He wears a pendant bearing Sophie's face. Portraits of her are displayed all around his unfussy rural home. The birthday card Sophie sent him from London has pride of place on his mantelpiece. He went on, "Sophie was my old child, my pride and joy. She was the spitting image of me when she was born, and she will always be my baby, no matter how old she is. I don't have much money, but I spoiled her. We are also very similar in character, a bit shy and reserved, but happy. She was always smiling." Sophie spent 14 months working as a nanny in London for £55 a week before she was murdered by the mother of the young boy she was looking after in September 2017. I remember her smiling and laughing the last time I saw her just before she went to England. I thought going abroad would do her good, open up new horizons for her, so I encouraged her to go. She always liked working with children, so I thought she would be happy. I never had any idea she was in trouble. It breaks my heart to know that in her final months she was abused, that she suffered in silence and that beaten so badly. Mr. Lionnet told how evil Cuidran Madownai had not only robbed him of his only child but of his future, walking his daughter down the aisle and the joy of becoming a grandfather. They have not only stolen the life of my only child, so brutally and without remorse, they have also stolen my sleep, my happiness, my peace of mind, my future. I will never have that moment of pride of seeing my baby girl dressed in white, with flowers in her hair and love and hope glistening in her eyes, as she takes my arm, to walk down the aisle to a man who would cherish her as much as I. I will never hear my daughter say, "Daddy, you are going to be a grandfather." I will never be called granddad. He added, "What they did to my child is beyond comprehension and unforgivable. The suffering they caused my young and impressionable daughter, our families and friends, is more than anyone should be forced to live with. They have ruined everything that we held dear. They have murdered my daughter, who was dependent on them. They burned her body so badly that she was unrecognizable. We have still not been able to lay Sophie to rest. We have not been granted closure. This nightmare doesn't end for us. We will carry the brutality of my daughter's final moments in our hearts and souls for the rest of our lives." Mr. Lionnet separated from Sophie's mother Catherine Devillon when his daughter was 4 years old, but the couple have come together to support each other through the ordeal of the trial and shared a drink together as they waited for a verdict. While Mr. Lionnet separated from Sophie's mother Catherine Devillon when his daughter was 4 years old, he maintained a strong relationship with his little girl. "Sophie and I have always been close," he said. "She had more freedom when she was with me than with her mum. She liked coming over. We would watch films and play video games together. She was friends with some of the other kids in the area. If we didn't see each other every week, it was because of my work or because she wanted to do something. It was not a big deal. We were there for each other. She loved children and playing with animals. She studied childcare at school, but she had trouble finding a job. So, when this opportunity came up in London, we thought it was a good thing. Sophie came to see me before she went to London. She was happy. The young French woman set off for London in July 2016. Despite a meagre salary of just £50 per week, Sophie told her family she was looking forward to her foreign adventure. Unable to top up her French pay-as-you-go mobile phone in the UK, the young nanny could not keep in regular contact with her family, but 14 months after she left home she would be dead. Mr. Lionnet explained, Sophie had a new phone and she couldn't make international calls. So, we talked to each other via Facebook. She also wrote to me. She sent me a lovely Father's Day card. However, Mr. Lionnet told how he received a knock at his door in the early hours of the morning in September last year to tell him his daughter was dead. He told Mail Online, "It was 4 o'clock in the morning when the police knocked on my door. It was still dark." They would not give me any details about what had happened to Sophie, only that she was the victim of a violent murder. They told me to contact their French ambassador in London. I couldn't believe it. I was in shock. I went to the boulangerie like I always do to collect the bread and then I went to work.